Greetings, one and all, once again, back to Exploring Arda, the Tolkien Center podcast where I am your host, Jackson, and I go through a bunch of Tolkien's works other than Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. So, now that we've got a couple books out of the way, I should say, we've covered Fall of Numenor, and we just finished Children of Húrin. I figured might as well just keep on going through the big stories of the history of Middle-earth. And today we will be starting, let's see if I can get it without the glare here, is good old Fall of Gondolin. So you can't really see it too well, the wording, but we are starting Fall of Gondolin. So I'm very excited. Especially just because it's one of the key moments of the Silmarillion, and it's I guess it's very memorable, especially. I guess that's the whole thing of key moments and part of the Silmarillion. But yeah, so we're starting a new story here, so I'm excited. New, a lot of new things going around. Obviously, new hairstyle, new outfit, things like that. So I thought it would be fun just to kind of start the new story off on a good note. So I think I don't know, I feel like I just really want to get started right now. So I think I'm just gonna go right into it, and hopefully you guys enjoy it, because I don't know, just chapter one. They're not really in chapters, I should say, since this is the first episode of the Fall of Gondolin. These aren't really in chapters, so I kind of split up the story on my own time of, somewhat reasonable episode lengths. So I'll be stopping at certain points in the story because it's not really split up into chapters. So I think with all the rambling out of the way, it's been a couple minutes, so I think we should just go right into the story. So let's get into it. The Tale of the Fall of Gondolin. Then said Little Heart, son of Bronwig, "Know then that Tuor was a man who dwelt in very ancient days in that land of the north called Dor-lómin, or the Land of Shadows, and of the Eldar the Noldoli know it best. Now the folk whence Tuor came wandered the forests and fells, and knew not and sang not of the sea. But Tuor dwelt not with them, and lived alone about that lake called Mithrim, now hunting in its woods, now making music beside its shores on his rugged harp of wood and the sinews of bears. Now many, hearing of the power of his rough songs, came near and far to hearken to his harping. But Tuor left his singing and departed to lonely places. Here he learnt many strange things, and got knowledge of the wandering Noldoli, who taught him much of their speech and lore. But he was not fated to dwell forever in those woods." There you go. Thereafter it is said that magic and destiny led him on a day to a cavernous opening, down which a hidden river flowed from Mithrim. And Tuor entered that cavern seeking to learn its secret. But the waters of Mithrim drove him forward into the heart of the rock, and he might not win back into the light. And this, it is said, was the will of Ulmo, Lord of the Waters, at whose prompting the Noldoli had made that hidden way. Then came the Noldoli to Tuor, and guided him along dark passages amid the mountains, until he came out in the light once more, and saw that the river flowed swiftly in a ravine of great depth with sides unscalable. Now Tuor desired no more to return, but went ever forward, and the river led him always toward the west. The sun rose behind his back and set before his face, and where the water foamed about many boulders or fell over falls, there were at times rainbows woven across the ravine. But at evening its smooth sides would glow in the setting sun, and for these reasons Tuor called it Golden Cleft, or the Gully of the Rainbow Roof, which is in the speech of the gnomes Clorfalk or Ilbrantiloth. There you go. Sorry, some of these names are very difficult for me to do. Now Tuor journeyed here for 3 days, drinking the waters of the secret river and feeding on its fish, and these were of golden blue and silver, and of many wondrous shapes. At length the ravine widened, and ever as it opened, its sides became lower and more rough, and the bed of the river more impeded with boulders against which the waters foamed and spouted. Long times would Tuor sit and gaze at the splashing water and listen to its voice, and then he would rise and leap onward from stone to stone, singing as he went, or as the stars came out in the narrow strip of heaven above the gully, he would raise echoes to answer the fierce twanging of his harp. Yeah, I'll actually do quick break here. So we get like the introduction to Tour, and also the introduction of my stammering while I read, which is always normal. So Tour is basically known, I guess, throughout the region and the land around Mithrim, of his songs and his harps, his harp music. But he's like, well, you know what? Sometimes he, he wanders off elsewhere because he prefers to be by himself, I suppose. Especially when he's like singing, and I guess he just needs his own time. So. And then I guess there just came a time where Tuor just started venturing further and further away from Mithrim and following the river, and just finds himself just on his own, I guess, surviving on his own, but I guess that's kind of what he wanted. So it's kind of a crazy introduction, but that's kind of who he is. So I think we should just get back into the story here without any more interruptions. One day, after a great journey of weary going, Tuor at deep evening heard a cry, and he might not decide of what creature it came. Now he said, "It is a fey creature. Now, nay, 'tis but some small beast that waileth among the rocks." Or again, it seemed to him that an unknown bird piped with a voice new to his ears, and strangely sad. And because he had not heard the voice of any bird in all his wandering down Golden Cleft, he was glad of the sound, although it was mournful. On the next day, at an hour of the morning, he heard the same cry above his head, and looking up, beheld 3 great white birds beating back up the gully on strong wind, and uttering cries like to the ones he had heard amid the dusk. Now these were the gulls, the birds of Aussay. In this part of that riverway, there were islets or islets. Well, I'm going to say islets of rock amid the currents, and fallen rocks fringed with white sand at the gully side. So that it was ill going, and seeking a while, Tuor found a spot where he might, with labor, scale the cliffs at last. Then came a fresh wind against his face, and he said, "This is very good, and like the drinking of wine." But he knew not that he was near the confines of the great sea. As he went along the waters, that ravine again drew together, and the walls towered up, so that he feared on a high cliff top, and there came a narrow neck, and this was full of noise. Then Tuor, looking downward, saw the greatest of marvels. So it seemed that a flood of angry water would come up to the narrows, and flow back against the river to its source. But that water which had come down from distant Mithrim would still press on, and a wall of water rose nigh to the cliff top, and it was crowned with foam and twisted by the winds. Then the waters of Mithrim were overthrown, and the incoming floods swept, roaring up like the channel, and whelmed the rocky islets, and turned the white sand, so that Tuor fled and was afraid, who did not know the ways of the sea. But the Ainur put it into his heart to climb from the gully when he did, or had he when whelmed in the incoming tide, and that was a fierce one by reason of a wind from the west. Then Tuor found himself in a rugged country, bare of trees, and swept by a wind coming from the set of the sun, and all the shrubs and bushes leaned to the dawn because of the prevalence of that wind. And here for a while he wandered till he came back to the black cliffs by the sea, and saw the ocean and its waves for the first time. And at that hour the sun sank beyond the rim of earth, far out to sea, and he stood on the cliff top with outspread arms, and his heart was filled with a longing very great indeed. Now some say that he was the first of men to reach the sea, and look upon it, and know the desire it brings, but I know not if they say well. In those regions he set up his abode, dwelling in a cove sheltered by great stable rocks, whose floor was of white sand, save when the high flood partly overspread it with blue water. Nor did foam or froth come there save at times of the direst tempest. There long he sojourned alone, and roamed about the shore or fared over the rocks at the ebb, marveling at the pools and the great weeds, the dripping caverns and the strange seafowl that he saw and came to know. But the rise and the fall of the water, and the voice of the waves was ever to him the greatest wonder, and ever did it seem a new and unimaginable thing. I'll do a little quick break. And it's not really much of a break because it's really just telling of how Tuor is considered, I guess what I just read actually here is like he was one of the first men to reach the sea, and the desire to, I guess, travel the seas and see what else is out there, which is actually a really cool point because of mankind always wanting to explore more, always set in their hearts to want to discover new things. And I forget which chapter in the Silmarillion it says that, but it's basically saying, like, yeah, mankind or the Edain are always going to have their hearts set for discovery, new things, always wanting to build up what they've already known, expand, explore, all the things like that. So it only makes sense for Tuor to actually have that in his heart, and it's really cool too, since he is, like, I guess, the first one to the sea. So, but yeah, so back to it again. Now, on the quiet waters of Mithrim, over which the voice of the duck or moorhen would carry far, he had fared much in a small boat with a prow fashioned like to the neck of a swan, and this he had lost on the day of his finding the hidden river. On the sea he had ventured not as yet, though his heart was ever egging him with the strange longing thereto, and on quiet evenings when the sun went down beyond the edge of the sea, it grew to a fierce desire. Timber he had that came down the hidden river. A goodly wood it was, for the Noldoli hewed it in the forest of Dorlamin, and floated it to him of a purpose. But he built not as yet aught save a dwelling in the sheltered place of his cove, which tales among the Eldar since named Falasquil. This by slow labor he adorned with fair carvings of the beasts and trees and flowers and birds that he knew about the waters of Mithrim, and ever among them was the swan, the chief. For Tuor loved this emblem, and it became the sign of himself, his kindred and folk thereafter. There he passed a very great while, until the loneliness of the empty sea got into his heart, and even Tuor, the solitary, longed for the voice of men. Herewith the Ainur had something to do, for Ulmo loved Tuor. One morning, while casting his eye along the shore, and it was when the latest days of summer, Tuor saw 3 swans, flying high and strong from the northward. Now these birds he had not before seen in these regions, and he took them for a sign, and said, Long has my heart been set on a journey far from here. Lo, now at length I will follow these swans. Behold, the swans dropped into the water of his cove, and there swimming thrice about, rose again, and winged slowly south along the coast. And Tuor, bearing his harp and spear, followed them. It was a great day's journey that Tuor put behind him that day, and he came ere evening to a region where trees again appeared, and the manner of that land through which he now fared differed greatly from those shores about Falasquil. There had Tuor known mighty clefts beset with caverns and great spout holes, and deep-walled coves, but from the cliff tops a rugged land and flat ran obliquely back to where a blue rim far to the east spoke of distant hills. Now, however, did he see a long and sloping shore in stretches of sand, while the distant hills marched ever nearer to the margin of the sea, and their dark slopes were clad with pine or fir, and about their feet sprang birches and ancient oaks. From the feet of the hills fresh torrents rushed down narrow chasms, and so found the shores and the salt waves. Now some of these clefts Tuor might not overleap, and often was it ill going in these places. But still he labored on, for the swans fared ever before him, now circling suddenly, now speeding forward, but never coming to earth, and the rush of their strong beating wings encouraged him. It is told that in this manner Tuor fared onward for a great number of days, and that winter marched from the north somewhat speedier than he for all his tirelessness. Nevertheless came he without scathe of beast or weather at a time of first spring to a river mouth. Now here was the land less northerly, and more kindly than about the issuing of Golden Cleft. And moreover, by a trend of the coast was the sea now rather to the south of him than to the west, as he could mark by the sun and stars, but he had kept his right hand always to the sea. The river flowed down a goodly channel, and on its banks were rich lands, grasses and moist meadow to the one side, and tree-grown slopes to the other. Its waters met the sea sluggishly, and fought not as the waters of Mithrim in the north. Long tongues of land lay islanded in its course, covered with reeds and bushy thicket, until further to seaward sandy spits ran out. And these were places beloved by such a multitude of birds as Tuor had nowhere yet encountered. Their piping and wailing and the whistling filled the air, and here amid their white wings Tuor lost sight of the 3 swans, nor saw he them again. Then did Tuor grow for a season weary of the sea, for the buffeting of his travel had been sore. Nor was this without almost devising, And that night the Noldoli came to him, and he arose from his sleep. Guarded by their blue lanterns, he found a way beside the river border, and strode so mightily inland that when dawn filled the sky to his right hand, lo, the sea and his voice were far behind him, and the wind came from before him, so that his odor was not even in the air. Thus came he soon to that region that has been called Arliscion, the place of reeds, and this in those lands that are to the south of Dorlamine, and separated therefrom by the shadowy mountains whose spurs run even to the sea. From these mountains came this river, and of great clearness and marvelous chill were its waters even at this place. Now this is a river most famous in the histories of Eldar and Noldoli, and in all tongues it is named Syrian. Here Tuor rested a while until, driven by desire, he arose once more to journey further and further by many days' marches along the river borders. Full spring had not yet brought summer when he came to a region yet more lovely. Here the song of small birds shrilled about him with the music of loveliness, for there are no birds that sing like the songbirds of the land of willows, and to this region of wonder he had now come. Here the river wound in wide curves with low banks throughout a great plain of the sweetest grass and very long and green. Willows of untold age were about its borders, and its wide bosom was strewn with water-lily leaves, whose flowers had not yet in the earliness of the year, but beneath the willows the green swords of the flag lilies were drawn, and sedges stood, and reeds in embattled array. Now there dwelt in these dark places a spirit of whispers, and it whispered to Tuor at dusk, and he was loath to depart, and at morn for the glory of the unnumbered buttercups he was yet more loath, and he tarried. Here he saw the first butterflies and was glad at the sight, and it is said that all butterflies and their kindred were born in the valley of the land of willows. Then came the summer and the time of moths and the warm evenings, and Tuor wondered at the multitude of flies, at their buzzing, of the droning of the beetles, and the hum of bees. And to all these things he gave names of his own, and wove the names into new songs on his old harp. And these songs were softer than his singing of old. Then Ulmo grew in dread, lest Tuor dwell forever here, and the great things of his design come not to fulfillment. Therefore he feared longer to trust Tuor's guidance to the Noldoli alone, who did service to him in secret, and out of fear of Melko, wavered much. Nor were they strong against the magic of that place of willows, for very great was its enchantment. Alright, and we're going to do a quick break here. There was a lot of, it's a lot of kind of going on and on and on about where Tuor is finding himself at. There's a lot of like, oh, well, there's some cliffs here and some rivers here, and this is this place. And so, yeah, that's basically a big, just on and on and on, which I guess kind of goes with like the whole joke of like Tolkien explaining basically everything. That it's like, okay, well, you know, cool. Tuor is going to all these different places. He's following the birds' calls, and now he's in a place where there's a bunch of like bees and beetles and flies, and it's like, okay, it's cool. It just kind of goes on and on and on, which is kind of funny. But yeah, eventually Ulmo is kind of like almost like worried that Tuor is just this wandering, basically like a nomad at this point, where he's just kind of like wandering from place to place, and he's like, this is a cool place, this is another cool place, and so almost impatient of like, okay, am I trusting this guy or not? And that's kind of where we're at in the story, so let's get back to it. Behold now, Ulmo leapt upon his car before the doorway of his palace, below the still waters of the outer sea. And his car was drawn by narwhal and sea lion, and was in fashion like a whale. And amidst the sounding of great conches, he sped from Ulmonen. So great was the speed of his going, that in days, and not in years without count, as might be thought, he reached the mouth of the river. Up this his car might not face without hurt to its water and its banks. Therefore Ulmo, loving all rivers in this one more than most, went thence on foot, robed in the middle in mail like the scales of blue and silver fishes. But his hair was of bluish silver, and his beard to his feet was of the same hue, and he bore neither helm nor crown. Beneath his mail fell the skirts of his kirtle of shimmering greens, and of what substance these were woven is not known. But whoso looked into the depths of their subtle colors seemed to behold the faint movements of deep waters, shot with the stealthy lights of phosphorescent fish that live in the abyss. Girt was he with a rope of mighty pearls, and he was shod with mighty shoes of stone. Thither he bore too his great instrument of music, and this was of strange design, for it was made of many long twisted shells, pierced with holes. Blowing therein and playing with his long fingers, he made deep melodies of a magic greater than any other musicians hath ever compassed on harp or lute, on lyre or pipe, or instruments of the bow. Then coming along the river, he sat among the reeds at twilight, and played upon his thing of shells, and it was nigh to those places where Tuor tarried. And Tuor hearkened and was stricken dumb. There he stood knee-deep in the grass, and heard no more the hum of insects, nor the murmur of the river borders, and the odor of flowers entered not into his nostrils. But he heard the sound of waves and the wail of sea-birds, and his soul leapt for rocky places in the ledges that reek of fish, for the splash of the diving cormorant, and those places where the sea bores into the black cliffs and yells aloud. Then Ulmo arose and spoke to him, and for dread he came near to death, for the depth of the voice of Ulmo is of the uttermost depth, even as deep as his eyes, which are of the deepest of all things. And Ulmo said, O Tuor of the lonely heart, I will not that thou dwell forever in fair places of birds and flowers, nor would I lead thee through this pleasant land, but that so it must be. But fare now on thy destined journey, and tarry not, for far from hence is thy weird set. Now must thou seek through the lands for the city of the folk called Gondolin, or the dwellers in stone, and the Noldoli shall escort thee thither in secret, for fear of the spies of Melkor. Words I will set to your mouth there, and there you shall abide a while. Yet maybe thy life shall turn again to the mighty waters, and of a surety a child shall come of thee, than whom no man shall know more of the uttermost deeps, be it of the sea, or of the firmament of heaven. Then spoke Ulmo also to Tuor some of his design and desire, but thereof Tuor understood little at that time, and feared greatly. Then Ulmo was wrapped in a mist, as it were, of sea air in those inland places, and Tuor, with that great music in his ears, would fain return to the regions of the great sea, yet remembering his bidding turned and went inland about the river, and so fared till day. Yet he that has heard the conches of Ulmo hears them call him till death, and so did Tuor find. When day came he was weary and slept till it was nigh dusk again, and the Noldoli came to him and guided him. So fared he many days by dusk and dark, and slept by day, and because of this it became afterwards that he remembered not over well the paths that he traversed in those times. Now Tuor and his guides held on untiring, and the land became one of rolling hills, and the river wound about their feet, and there were many dales of exceeding pleasantness. But here the Noldoli became ill at ease. These, said they, are the confines of whose region which Melkor infesteth with his goblins, the people of hate. Far to the north, yet also not far enough, would they were 10,000 leagues, woof, lie the mountains of iron where sits the power and terror of Melkor, whose thralls we are. Indeed, in this guiding of thee we do in secret from him, and did he know all our purposes, the torment of the Balrogs would be ours. Falling then into such fear, the Noldoli soon after let him, and he fared alone amid the hills, and their going proved ill afterwards. For Melkor has many eyes, it is said, and while Tuor fared with the gnomes, they took him twilight ways, and by many secret tunnels through the hills. But now he became lost, and climbed often to the tops of knolls and hills, scanning the lands about. Yet he might not see signs of any dwelling of folk, and indeed the city of the Gondolin was not found with ease, seeing that Melkor and his spies had not yet even discovered it. It is said nonetheless that at this time those spies got wind thus that the strange foot of man had been set in those lands, and that for that Melkor doubled his craft and watchfulness. And I'm going to do a quick break because it is a little bit hard to read, because some of the flow of the sentences are very different than what I'm used to, I suppose. But to kind of like recap it, I guess, before reading the rest of this episode, is that basically Ulmo is he gets tired of Tuor kind of wandering here and there, and so he finally comes to him, and with his, I guess, magic, his the magic conch, which is kind of funny. It's a little SpongeBob reference, but I guess with his vehicle, I guess it's funny to read that like almost car. Basically, I get that it's like basically drawn by what was it, a narwhal and a sea lion, which is crazy to think about. But hey, it's a fantasy setting. What do you expect? Olmo comes to him and says, "Hey, you need to go find the Gondolin, or go find Gondolin." And he speaks to Tuor of other things which Tuor can't understand yet because Tuor has just been wandering. And I guess Tuor should know by now that, like there is a war at hand and stuff with like Melkor and Morgoth, which is actually interesting that so far, Melkor, or in this instance Melko, just without the R at the end, Melko, is still referenced as Melko. So, I don't know. Interesting that Olmo, I guess, never really forgets who Morgoth was originally, which is, tragic, but also like very, I guess, smart on his part. So eventually Tuor's like, okay, well, I guess I gotta go there, and he's being led by the Noldoli and the gnomes. So, yeah, and I'll read a little bit more until the end of the episode. So here we go. Now, when the gnomes, out of fear, deserted Tuor, one Voronwe or Bronwig followed far off despite his fear, when chiding availed not to enhearten the others. Now Tuor had fallen into great weariness, and was sitting beside the rushing stream, and the sea longing was about his heart, and he was minded once more to follow this river back to the wide waters and the roaring waves. But this Voronwe, the faithful, came up to him again, and standing by his ear said, O Tuor, think not that but thou shalt again one day see thy desire. Arise now, and behold, I will not leave thee. I have not of the road learned of the Noldoli, being a craftsman and maker of things made by hand of wood and of metal, and I have joined not the band of escort till late. Yet of old have I heard whispers and sayings said in secret amid the weariness of thraldom, concerning a city where Noldoli might be free, could they find the hidden way thereto. And we twain may without a doubt find a road to the city of stone, where is that freedom of the Gondolin. Know then that the Gondolin were that kin of the Noldoli who alone escaped Melkor's power, when at the battle of unnumbered tears he slew and enslaved their folk, and wove spells about them, and caused them to dwell in the hells of iron, faring thence at his will and bidding only. Long time did Tuor and Voronwe seek for that city of that folk, until after many days they came upon a deep dale amid the hills. Here went the river over a very stony bed with much rush and noise, and it was curtained with a heavy growth of alders. But the walls of the dale were sheer, for they were nigh to some mountains which Voronwe knew not. There in the green wall that gnome found an opening like a great door with sloping sides, and this was cloaked with thick bushes and long-tailed undergrowth. Yet Voronwe's piercing sight may not be deceived. Nonetheless, it is said that such a magic had its builders set about it, by aid of Olmo, whose power ran in that river even in the dread of Melkor fared upon its banks, that none save of the blood of the Noldoli might light on it thus by chance. Nor would Tuor have found it ever, but for the steadfastness of that gnome Voronwe. Now the Gondolin made their abode thus secret, out of dread of Melkor. Yet even so, no few of the braver Noldoli would slip down the river Syrian from those mountains, and if Mary perished so by Melkor's evil, many finding this magic passage came at last to the city of stone, and swelled its people. Greatly did Tuor and Voronwe rejoice to find this gate. Yet entering, they found there a way dark, rough going, and circuitous. I'm going to say circuitous. And long time they traveled, faltering within its tunnels. It was full of fearsome echoes, and there was a countless stepping of feet would come behind them, so that Voronwe became adread and said, "It is Melkor's goblins, the orcs of the hills." Then they would run, falling over stones in the blackness, till they perceived it was but the deceit of the place. Thus did they come, after it seemed a measureless time of fearful groping, to a place where a fair light glimmered. And made for this gleam, they came to a gate like that by which they had entered, but in no way overgrown. Then they passed into the sunlight, and could for a while see naught, but instantly a great song sounded, and there was a clash of armor, and behold, they were surrounded by warriors in steel. Then they looked up and could see, and lo, they were at the foot of steep hills, and these hills made a great circle wherein lay a wide plain, and set therein, not rightly at the midpost, but rather nearer to that place where they stood, was a great hill with a level top, and upon that summit rose a city in the new light of the morning. And yeah, that is where we're going to end this episode, just as a basically like an introduction to the book itself. So yeah, so eventually Tuor gets a friend to travel with. So Veronway pretty much is introduced into the story, and he pretty much joins Tuor because I guess Veronway had just joined the group of the Noldoli, and the Noldoli, I guess, are in fear of Tuor, I suppose. Maybe it's just because Tuor had met Ulmo before, and I guess the Noldoli fear Ulmo and the waters and the rivers, which I suppose would make sense because of the whole power of the Ainur and stuff. But yeah, Veronway joins him, and because Veronway is the Noldoli, it's by basically chance that Veronway finds the hidden entrance to the, I guess, like the whole land of Gondolin, or the whole area that the Gundothlum are part of, and that's where they accidentally go through all of these dark tunnels and find themselves basically in the land of Gondolin. So that's kind of how they find it. And yeah, the whole thing of like Melkor always wanting to try to find Gondolin is a very big thing, because especially in the Silmarillion, there was time and time again that Melkor or Morgoth is constantly on the watch to find out where the hidden city is. And so this whole thing of Fall of Gondolin is that whole premise, is that it's supposed to be a city of protection for the elves. And yeah. But yeah, so that is going to be what I have for now, the introduction to Fall of Gondolin. So there's not really chapters, so to speak. So I'll be titling these episodes a little differently, I suppose. But hopefully you guys enjoyed the introduction to Fall of Gondolin. Otherwise, yeah, just be sure to check out my channel. I don't have my book with me at this point, but be sure to check out my book, The Lands of Ordia, Power of Heaven. It's available on Amazon. And if you've, reached this far in the episode, yeah, I haven't really mentioned my book in a while, but I'm working on the second one, so I might as well just mention it right now for you guys to check out. So, and I think with all that being said, just stay tuned for another episode, and may the light of Elbereth be with you all. Farewell.